We're going to begin Chapter 19 by looking at the basic flow of blood through the heart and the body. You want to follow along with pages 730 and 731 in your book. So go ahead, if you don't have your book out, pause the video, get your book, turn to those pages. There's so many words and so many things to label, it's not practical to write all that out on our picture in your binder. So I'm going to give the ideas and I'm going to use abbreviations. You'll need these pages in your book to get the actual full terms. Another thing to point out is the use of red and blue. So we use blue to represent deoxygenated blood. So it doesn't mean that this blood has zero oxygen in it. Your blood is never at zero oxygen. It has less oxygen because this is blood that has given oxygen to cells. In real life, it is not blue. Your blood is never blue. Deoxygenated blood in real life is dark red. The book just uses blue as a representation. Then we also have parts of this in red. Red is used to represent oxygenated blood. This is blood that has picked up oxygen in the lungs. So it is at a higher level of oxygen. So again, your oxygen's never zero. There's always oxygen in your blood. It can be higher or it can be lower. And your blood is never blue. It's either dark red if it has low oxygen, and oxygenated blood is bright red. So oxygen does increase the redness of the blood, makes it more oxygen in your blood, the brighter red it is. Now let's start looking at the heart. The heart is divided into two sides, and it's always the heart's right and left, not your right and left. So you have to get used to flipping right and left. But we have over here the right side of the heart in blue. So the right side of the heart has deoxygenated blood. And we have over here the left side of the heart in red. So the left side has oxygenated. Then we have the lungs. So here's a lung and here's a lung. The lungs are where you get oxygen. So the blood is going into the lungs as deoxygenated. Here, notice it's purple. This is your pulmonary capillaries. So it's transitioning from deoxygenated to oxygen. It's getting oxygen. Then we also have systemic. This means out in your body. So these are systemic capillaries. You have some at the top, some at the bottom. The ones at the top here represent your head and arms. The things that are above your heart, the ones at the bottom represent the rest of your body, what's below your heart. And here again, it's purple, it's transitioning. This is where you are giving oxygen. So this is where you give oxygen, and lungs is where you get oxygen. So you have kind of this figure 8 pattern. Let's make an analogy here. Let's suppose that you have a job and you get up and you go to work. So you leave your house and you go to your work. So you have your house. And you go to work. And at work, you get money. Then you come back home. Now you're back home with your money. Now you leave your house and you go out to a party. or you go out, not necessarily to a party itself, but you go out with your friends and you spend your money. Maybe you go out to eat or you go to the movies. You do whatever you do to have fun and you spend your money. Then after you spend your money, you come back home. Now you're out of money. So the next day you go to work again and you get more money, you come back home. Then you go out and you spend your money. Now you're out of money, you come back home. You keep doing that day after day. It's this figure 8 pattern. That's the idea with blood flow through the heart. You have deoxygenated blood in your heart. It goes to the lungs and it gets oxygen. Then it comes back to the heart as oxygenated. Now you have oxygenated blood in the heart. This oxygenated blood goes out to systemic, it goes out to your body, and it gives oxygen. Then it comes back to the heart as deoxygenated. So the blood is always going to go from the heart to the lungs, back to the heart, and then from the heart to the body, back to the heart. It's this figure 8 pattern. So we have the right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood from the body. So you're going to have deoxygenated blood from the body goes into the right heart. The right heart pumps it to the lungs where it will get oxygen. Then you have oxygenated blood to the left heart. Then the left heart pumps it out to the body where it will give oxygen. Then it returns, becomes deoxygenated, and returns here to the right side of the heart. Now we're going to build on that basic pattern. The heart has 4 chambers. Okay, so these are like compartments. You have atria on top, so you have a right and a left atrium on top. So atrium is singular, atria is plural. Then you have your ventricles on the bottom. So you have right and left ventricle on the bottom. Atria receive blood from veins. So veins are what carry blood to your heart, and the atria are the receiving chambers of the heart. Ventricles pump blood into arteries. So arteries are what carry blood away from the heart, and the ventricles are the pumping chambers. They're pushing the blood out into those arteries. So now is when you want to follow along on your book, find the atria and the ventricles. I said it gets too much to try and label all that stuff in our picture here. We can put some little initials here. This would be like your right atrium, right ventricle. Over here is your left atrium. You can't really see that. Left atrium, left ventricle. Blood flows from atria to ventricles. So the path of blood is going to be like this, from the atria to the ventricles. Okay, then let's look at the vessels. You have all these vessels carrying the blood back and forth to the heart. Whenever we're talking about the path of blood through the heart, we're always going to start with the right atrium. That's always our starting point. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get used to that. And we're going to start with the right atrium. So you're going to have deoxygenated blood in the right atrium. That's going to flow through to the right ventricle. The ventricle is going to pump that blood. And the vessel that it pumps it into is the pulmonary trunk. This is the pulmonary trunk right here. And again, follow along with the pictures in your book to more clearly see the pulmonary trunk. That's where the deoxygenated blood is being pumped from the right ventricle. The pulmonary trunk, if you follow it up, it branches. So you have a branch here and you have a branch here. Those are your pulmonary veins. Pulmonary arteries. Arteries go away from the heart. So this branches into your two pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary arteries are what take that blood into your lungs. And in your lungs, you then flow through your pulmonary capillaries. So here we already labeled your pulmonary capillaries. That's where you get oxygen. Veins carry blood back to the heart. So now we have right here and right here, pulmonary veins. And you have 4 of them, 2 on each side. Those go to your left atrium. Then from the left atrium, we flow into the left ventricle. Then the left ventricle is going to pump into an artery. Right here is the artery the left ventricle pumps into. That is the aorta. The aorta branches, and in chapter 20 we're going to learn the names of a lot of these arteries and veins, but for now we're just going to call them systemic arteries or systemic veins. So you have branches that come off of the aorta. All of these branches that go out to all the parts of the body we can collectively call systemic arteries. So from the aorta, you branch out into systemic arteries. That's what goes out to all the different systemic capillaries all over your body. So all over in your body, you have all these capillary beds. So you just keep branching and branching to get to all the parts of your body. So you're going to go to your systemic capillaries. That's where you're going to give oxygen to your cells. Then we have deoxygenated blood is going to go to your systemic veins. And again, you start off with lots of branches. Hundreds of branches of systemic veins. And they are moving back toward your heart. And as they do, they merge with each other. So you have all these branches, they're merging, forming fewer veins, but those fewer veins are bigger. As you get close to the heart, you come down to just 2 main veins that are going to connect to the heart. You have the superior and inferior vena cava. So all these systemic veins merge in the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. So the superior, remember top, everything from your head and your arms is coming right here to the superior vena cava. Anything from below your heart is coming here to the inferior vena cava. And those 2 vessels are what put the blood into your right atrium. So there's your path. We can divide this path into 2 circuits. You have a pulmonary circuit and a systemic circuit. The pulmonary circuit is the right side of the heart to the lungs. And the systemic circuit is the left side of the heart to the body. Both circuits begin with an atrium. So pulmonary circuit is going to begin with the right atrium, and it's going to end with the pulmonary veins. The systemic circuit is going to begin with the left atrium, and it is going to end with the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. Okay, and again, follow along with your book. It gives complete list of everything in these two circuits. Okay, one more thing we need to talk about now is valves. You have to make sure that blood always flows in the right direction. You don't want blood to back up. So you have valves to ensure one-way flow of blood. And these valves are found at the entrance and exit of each ventricle. So you have two AV valves, which stands for atrioventricular. These AV valves, as their name says, are between the atrium ventricles. So these are at the entrance to the ventricle. So this is between the atria and the ventricles. So this little flap here and this flap, and see these little flaps? That's the AV valves. They open to let blood go from the atria into the ventricles. And then when the ventricles pump blood into the arteries, they close. That way the blood has to go into the arteries and not back into the atria. The other set of valves is the semilunar valves. These are between the ventricle and the artery that it pumps into. So you have the pulmonary semilunar, would be right here, where the right ventricle pumps into the pulmonary trunk, and the aortic semilunar is right there, where the left ventricle pumps into the aorta. So if we add in our valves now, and we do a whole entire path of blood through circulation, we're going to start with the right atrium. Then that blood has to flow through the right AV valve. Now, there's other names for these AV valves. The right AV valve has 3 parts to it, so it's also called the tricuspid. Then it would be in the right ventricle. Then the right ventricle has to pump the blood through the pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk. Then that trunk branches into the pulmonary arteries, which goes to the lungs, to the pulmonary capillaries. We'll go ahead and put that in this purple, because now we're getting oxygen. Then from the pulmonary capillaries, we now have oxygenated blood. It's going to go back to the left side of the heart. So now we're going to have pulmonary veins. This whole line so far, all of this is pulmonary circuit. Then the pulmonary veins put that oxygenated blood into the left atrium. It has to flow through the left AV valve. It has 2 flaps, so it's also called the bicuspid, and another name for it is mitral, which you'll see later how it got its name mitral. Then we go into the left ventricle, which pumps that blood through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta. The aorta branches to go all over your body, so those are systemic arteries, all those branches. Then we go into the systemic capillaries, where you give oxygen to your cells. Then we have deoxygenated blood in your systemic veins. These merge together as they get closer to the heart, and you end up with the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, putting blood back into your right atrium. And this whole line is the systemic circuit. So practice this. The rest of the chapter, you're going to need to know this flow of blood through the heart and lungs and body. So review this, practice this. You should be able to list it all out. If I say start at the right atrium, you should be able to trace the path of blood and follow it on a picture all the way through the heart, to the lungs, back to the heart, through the body, and back to the heart again.